Breathing in and letting go. Coming into this beautiful moment. We breathe in and let go. So for our beloved YouTubers out there, I do have a cold as I'm giving this sermon, so if I seem a little bit extra fun today, that's what's going on. And sniffly. Nonetheless, we show up and we have a beautiful gathering in community. So today's topic is the Dunisha wisdom of fall, of autumn, but just naturally the cycles that occur throughout the year. And so I'll be touching a little bit about that shortly. But one of the first quotes I wanted to share today, which I talk about a lot in my book, is slowing down, peace is never in a hurry. And I just love that short sentence there. Peace is never in a hurry. Because even our egos sometimes might have a tendency to use peace as a badge of honor and then want to try and speed up to get to peace. It's like, if I just work harder, if I just do X, Y, Z, then I will achieve this so-called thing of peace. And I've even had students over the years that kind of want to plow through the program to get to the end, not recognizing, eventually they recognize that it's not about the speed of which, or even the quote hard work put into it. It's more about the soft presence of peace. Really hear those two words together as one, the soft presence of peace. And when we remember that, it allows us to actually, this is the irony, is that yes, we might be working towards some quote end goal of peace, but when we actually utilize this quote, you actually start to embody it and feel it in the moment. So it's not some futuristic thing that you're working on. You're actually starting to actualize it and realize it right here, right now. And I love seasons. I love the cycle of seasons. That's partly why we moved to Colorado, to experience 4 seasons. And there's definitely a different energy here, but you could still feel it no matter where you're at in the world. Even in Arizona, when it would still be like 95 degrees in September, I could still feel around the autumn equinox, there's a shift that you can almost sense that happens when that occurs. And so it's still there. The energy is still there. But what I love about fall and then coming into winter is that it's definitely, there's an energy on our planet that it's a slowing down energy. It's a reflective energy. And we can apply so many metaphors to it. But there's very real life metaphors and real life wisdom that's occurring, especially when you're in an environment where you get to see the change fully happening. And so for the spring equinox, it's the spring equinox and the autumn equinox. For people who may not know, the equinox is equal day and light, or equal day and night. And so it's the 2 points of the year where there is just a very beautiful equilibrium. And it's definitely represented for the equal amount of day and light that manifests for those days, for those few days in between. And so for the spring equinox in Dunisha, we view this as one of the polarities, kind of like the yin and yang symbol, and then you have the autumn equinox. So for those of you who know or don't know the yin and yang symbol, you have that beautiful black and white, and then it ebbs into each other. I wish I had a picture of it right now. But even when it's completely black on this side, there's still a circle of white, and even when it's completely white on this side, there's a circle of black. And so that represents polarity, not duality. A lot of people think of it as representing duality, but how I define duality versus polarity in my book, Living Peace, is duality is morality. It's judgment oriented. It's a mentally created construct of right, wrong, and good, bad. Polarity is the natural opposites that you find throughout the universe, that there really is no judgment about them. They just exist, such as daytime, nighttime, hot and cold, except the seasons, winter and summer. There's this natural polarity that exists within all things, even down to our positive and negative atoms. Now, when we say positive, negative, it does not mean the judgment oriented in with it. It just means the natural manifestation, such as when you see the positive and negative ends of a magnet and what happens when you connect them. And so think of the yin and yang symbol as polarity. And anytime I talk about duality, think of it as the judgments we have, such as if you hate summer, that's summer itself is polarity of winter, but when you hate it, you're adding your own judgment, likes, dislikes on top of it. And that's when you start to fall into the duality. So if you remove humanity from planet Earth and you just look at all of the phenomena that exists, there's a polarity there, but once you add humanity onto it with their likes and their dislikes and all of their judgments of morality on top of the planet, that's when you develop duality. And that's how we define it in Living Peace and in our program and in Dunisha. And so in Dunisha, we really honor polarity and the importance of having times for reflection, having times for rest, having times for growing, and having times for great vitality. But we're constantly looking to curb the tide of our judgments that manifest through our dualistic belief systems that we may still have in our opinions. So we're looking to make peace with those while we're looking to embrace the natural polarities of life. I hope that was a sufficient explanation. If not, you can find my book on Amazon. Hashtag plug. So in the spring equinox, which is generally between March 20th to the 23rd, it sometimes shifts throughout each year. It could be the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. I think this year the autumn equinox was September 23rd, which was my birthday. So yay! So in the spring, we reflect on how we're showing up for others. It's a time to really reflect because we're coming out of winter and we're starting to get more active. So it's a time to really reflect and see, have I been uber introverted lately, and how can I start showing up more in the world? Almost imagine it as like a birthing. When the spring comes, you start to see the buds starting to manifest on the trees, the flowers, the lilies popping up, etc. And so that's a great time to really say, okay, I've had whatever type of winter I may have had, especially when you're cold, we're generally inside more. So this is a time to really reflect and how I could show up more in life. The autumn equinox, which is fascinating because it's literally happening to me as we speak because I'm under the weather, it invites us to reflect on how we could show up more for ourselves. We just came out of the rambunctious summer, especially if you live around here, hot damn, people are just constantly going 24/7. And then in the winter time, they slow down. But in the autumn, once that equinox hits, it's a beautiful time to reflect on, okay, I've had this kind of summer, whatever it might be. How can I move forward into winter, into these quieter months, into these longer nights? And how can I reflect on more efficiently showing up for myself? Now, please do not mistake me here, because I started with the yin and yang symbol, yes? So even when you're in fall or winter, you're still going to be showing up for other people, just as when you're in spring and summer, you're still going to be showing up for yourself. But these are just two natural points that occur in our cycle of our planet Earth that are a wonderful time to reflect inward and reflect outward as a reminder. Because guess what happens when you're in summer 24/7? Do you think that's healthy? You get burnt out when you're just go, 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 and there's no time for rest and relaxation and introspection. And what happens when you're in winter 24/7? You're just you eventually start to stagnate, and it really starts to manifest within your body, within your mind, and it's not healthy. What happens when you're always in spring all the time, when you're always in the planting of the seeds? You're constantly in the inspiration, but you may not necessarily be following through and seeing projects to their fruition. Same thing when we're in autumn all the time. We're so caught up in the juiciness of introspection that we're just constantly self-validating, but we may not actually be taking the full time to rest and then enter into spring and then enter into summer. Because a lot of us can sometimes, whose favorite month or whose favorite season is autumn, But think about it, if pumpkin spice was 24/7, 360 days a year, you would not appreciate it in the same way. I'm sure there's a few people that would test that. So let's go ahead and just take that breath for a moment. And obviously, even if you're like for us, even when we were in Arizona, there was a few trees that would change leaves, and people would even still decorate their homes with autumn leaves and autumn colors, even if they didn't have trees around them that were changing. So it's still something that as a human species we just appreciate because there's a fantastic metaphor there. So trees shedding their leaves is fantastic, isn't it? And I like to view it as when we take that time to introspect in the autumn, it's a time to release notions and belief systems and ideas and opinions and maybe even past mistakes. I don't really use that word, but a lot of people do. The things that happen to us, it's time to release and to shed ourselves of these notions, shed ourselves of the summer that we had, so that we can then effectively go into a time of introspection and then effectively go into the barren months of the winter where we're literally just kind of shoring up ourselves. Again, what happens for most people, especially here in the West, we are a culture of overstimulation. We're a stimulation nation. And it's fascinating that a lot of products that people are always trying to sell us is they're trying to give us something more, something on top of what we already have. And in a lot of healing journeys, it's not about gaining anything extra. It's actually about releasing what we already have. So think about it when you have a home and you just keep adding things and adding things and adding things and adding things and adding things. You run out of space and it just gets to be too much. Think of those of us, for many years I was a binge eater, and so to calm my mind I would just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and that would bring me peace. But what was fascinating is that really what would have benefited me was to actually go into my psychology and release a lot of the notions that I had or the self-judgments I was having, etc., that were causing me the stress that was then leading into the comfort that I was seeking. So what I really invite people, no matter what you're struggling with, if you're that hungry caterpillar for something in life, you're seeking pleasure, you're seeking happiness, you're seeking peace, you're seeking dot, 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 whatever it is, try this on for size. Try going within and releasing some ideas that you have about yourself, releasing clutter from your life, releasing whatever it might be. Imagine the metaphor of the tree that is shedding itself. Because once you shed yourself, then you can actually get into the time when the spring comes, where you can actually enjoy the beauty of the new buds coming, the flowers coming, and then the summertime. But what's fascinating is that when we're constantly chasing some satisfaction, we never fully get to enjoy it because we've never actually allowed ourselves to go through those barren months. You know, people often talk about dry spells, whatever it might be. It might be in romance, it might be in prosperity, it could be anything, having a dry spell of something. But how I've come to look at dry spells is that they're a beautiful time for quiet, for quietude, for introspection. And they may happen at any season. We really don't know for sure, for certain. But normally, do we allow ourselves to appreciate the dry spell, or do we freak out and then instantly think something needs to change? I have to go harder. I have to speed up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rather than just saying, you know what, right here, right now, for whatever reason, I'm not going to analyze it. But there's a dry spell. There's a barren month. And I'm going to look at that as an opportunity to go inward. That way, because nothing lasts forever, it's not going to last forever. And so without me even trying, I'm going to naturally come out of this barren month. And because I really tended to my soil during it, rather than ignoring it and constantly just yelling at the tree to bloom, I will be ready for the abundance that will soon come in the spring and the summer. One of my favorite quotes, I wish I could remember who it was by. It's by, I believe, a famous Zen master, but it was something along the lines of, he said, every spring doing nothing, the grass grows by itself, or the grass returns by itself. Every spring, us doing nothing, the grass returns by itself. And the first time I heard that quote, it just, I don't know, it was one of those like aha moments where, because in the West, our Western culture, we're taught that you just have to paddle upstream so much to do anything, to get anything. But what's fascinating is when you can actually return to yourself and appreciate life on a moment to moment basis, you're going to notice that life goes on. And it's actually our resistance to change that makes us suffer so much more. And that resistance to change, the resistance from the seasons going from time to time, month to month, is what really can stagnate us and harm us. You know, if we're always thinking we want it to be a certain season, we always want the abundance to look exactly the way it looks every single month, we're really going to burn ourselves out and cause ourselves to suffer, rather than giving ourselves permission to relax. So let's breathe that in for a moment. Let me see what else I have written down here. So I'll just go ahead and read this real quick. So in the springtime, so I'm going to use the yin-yang example. So in the springtime, we have yang rising. It's a time of gaining momentum. In the summer, it's about action, decisiveness, and projective energy. You're putting your energy out into the world. In the autumn, it shifts back to yin rising, so it's slowing momentum. And in the winter, it's a time of rest, introspection, and receptive energy. So I joked previously that I'm in the midst of it as we speak. And what's fascinating is right after my birthday, in a time of introspection, that's autumn equinox, you know, I get knocked on my ass with this cold that's inviting me to slow the F down. And what's interesting is even today, we have a smaller attendance on a Sunday. This past week, we had smaller attendance in some of the classes. And so it's rather than judging that and saying, what am I not doing? You know, I'm just saying, oh, yes, thank you for reminding me it's autumn. And there is, even just as a collective consciousness, I'm seeing it in how people are showing up for things and how things are shifting and changing. There is a subtle energy there. And this month, I actually chose to take Wednesdays off because for a while now, I've been teaching every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Sundays, then having sessions all day long. So it's been getting a lot of energy. And there hasn't been really enough time for me to actually look inward. And those of us who know, if you're who is a creative, right? If you're creative and you're constantly working, it can sometimes not give you the full opportunity to get into that work. And so anytime I've ever written a book, it's always been, and this is not an excuse, I've really contemplated this, but just observing, anytime I've written a book, it's been when I have done nothing else, because I fully give myself permission to get in there. And for a while, I always contemplate, because a lot of people use this as an excuse where they're just like, I just need to take a month off or a sabbatical, but then they do nothing. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. And that is a beautiful thing, to do nothing and to take that sabbatical. For me, whenever I take sabbaticals, which I'm not currently doing, but whenever I take sabbaticals, a book always comes out of it. And so that's respecting that energy. And so for my version of that, for this October, I am taking Wednesdays off for a time being. And then maybe in November, it might shift to something else, because there is a time I want to start respecting these cycles, rather than always looking at it, okay, well, I always have to make this amount every single month and constantly showing up. Because on one hand, I don't want to disappoint anyone here. So once I agree to something, I just want to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, because there's an expectation there. On the other hand, it's like, shit, we have bills to pay, and this is what provides it. So Alaric, as much as I love you, honey, your books don't pay the bills.
That's him saying that.
Yes. And so, yes, if you want to take some time off to finally finish Living Earth, that's fantastic. But there's still the bills to pay and a community to support. So on one hand, there's the expectation, not wanting to let down people who enjoy what we provide. But on the other hand, there's an expectation that we live in the modern century, and there is a lot of bills to pay. And so it's fascinating that I'm sure all of you who work hard have that mentality where we kind of get ourselves in that trap of summer. And we may not be fully allowing ourselves to experience the autumn, and then the winter, and then the return of spring. And so I'm really excited to write about this in Living Earth, because there's going to be a there's going to be a soft presence chapter talking about these cycles, talking about this. And we have a couple teens with us today, and I would even love to have a class one day on even how sometimes our education system forces, they're shaking their head. They're like, oh gosh, yes. And we don't always allow the honoring of the absorption and the soft presence to exist in the classroom setting, because it's always, a lot of it is about expectation and a valuing system of a child's worth, of a teenager's worth. And so we can take this wisdom that the earth provides and apply it to so many systems, so many structures. And so I really am excited to embody it more this coming autumn, which I'm being forced to in this moment, which is lovely. Wasn't taking the lesson, and so here it is. And then come winter, and just to observe the cycle that manifests. And my invitation for all of you is to do the same, to really contemplate how this manifests in your life. And when I do finish Living Earth, living peace is the philosophy of Dunisha. It's the peace philosophy of Dunisha, while Living Earth is the spirituality, the earthen spirituality of Dunisha. And that's the path that we walk here, and these robes represent. So let me see what time we have here. How much more time? I'm speaking a lot more than I thought I would for being under the weather. Under the weather, what an interesting term, right? So Ralph Waldo Emerson, I put down a couple quotes here, and one of them was, "What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. And I just love that quote, because so many people agree with peace. I'm sure all of us here have been like, yeah, I really like that peace stuff, but then our actions may not be fully embodying it on a regular basis. We read things, we say things, we tell people who we are and what we're about. But what's fascinating is that really not even analyzing it too much, just take a gander at your daily actions, and they're going to tell you really what's important to you. A lot of people over the years would say how much peace is important to them. But if you actually looked at their daily actions and what they're doing, really, they're more interested in their addiction. They're more interested in their work life. They're more interested in whatever it might be. And that's not to say there's a judgment involved with that, but I think it's really important for us to be honest with ourselves and to honor, yes, I might say these things, and I might agree with them, and I love them. I read this book, it's fantastic, but am I really living it? And the best way to recognize that and not get trapped in the ego validation of speaking it all the time, actually practicing what we preach, is to look at our behavior on a daily basis. And that's going to be so rewarding to do, because it's going to really shine the light on the areas where we might be kind of falling off the wagon, so to speak. But again, it's okay if you want to be off the wagon. There's no judgment there. But I think it's important for us to not trick ourselves and to think we're doing one thing when we're actually still behaving in another way. And let's breathe that in for a moment. Something I was going to add on top of that was so juicy, but just slipped my mind, and that's okay. Just letting it go. Oh, here it was. Thich Nhat Hanh. Wonderful quote. Some of you may have heard me say it before, where he says, "My actions are my only true belongings. My actions are my only true belongings." And so one more quote by Emerson. "Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This new day is too dear, with its hopes and invitations, to waste a moment on the yesterdays. Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year." That last sentence there, oh my gosh, I got shivers. Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. And even on my birthday, it was so cute. People were asking me, they're just like, "Well, what are you going to do? What's this big thing you're going to do for your birthday?" And I'm like, for me, it's enough to just share it, with people. To me, it's just enough to show up, because the way we live our lives really is that every day is a beautiful day. Even with this sickness, even with me feeling this way, yesterday was brilliant. Today is brilliant. And I think the reason why I'm able to feel that way every day, even when it's what some might call a quote shitty day, is because I don't compare one day to another day. Who has a habit of that, where you're comparing certain days to other days, certain weeks to other weeks, certain months to other months, certain years to other years? And we just get caught up in that. But when you really release the notion of that, when you really let go of the idea of needing to compare one to the other, you can drop into that soft presence so much more deliciously and show up for peace, even when it is kind of a rough day, even when you don't feel at your friskiest. But I love it too, this quote, because it reminded me, because yesterday, you know, I'm sure some of our teammates, maybe myself included, missed a couple steps, right? In our performance, we did a line dancing performance for our Bayfield Heritage Days, and finish every day and be done with it. Sure, there may have been some missteps along the way, but that's okay. You know, we move on to the next moment and we show up anyhow. The way I teach line dancing is that it's not about getting every step perfectly or missing them and beating yourselves up. It's just honoring the journey, the joy involved with it, and to look at it as a life lesson. Really look at it as a life lesson that every single one of us is going to say some weird shit. We're going to do some weird shit throughout our lifetime. But once it's been done, complete it, release the notion, let that leaf fall from the tree, and move on to the next cycle, the next season wheel. Let it return and then become the new version of you that you are blooming into, without getting caught up with the old nonsense that we really hold ourselves too accountable for. When we hold ourselves too accountable for it, we never allow ourselves to evolve out of who that person was and give ourselves permission to be who we are today. So I had other stuff I was going to talk about and read, but I think this was juicy enough to cover, because if I go into anything else, it will just add another component, which I tend to give a lot more on Sundays. And when I just focus it on one or two things, it's a lot easier to really really reflect on it. So let's take a breath and release. Honoring this moment, we say thank you, thank you, thank you, coming into being. No matter where we're at, no matter where we're at on our journey, no matter how we're feeling, we can touch this moment with the full softness of our presence and be grateful for the miracle of life that is occurring before our eyes. Taking a deep breath in and letting go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So our beloved YouTubers, thank you. If you made it this far into the video, if you watched all of it, it's always deeply appreciated. Links are down below. If you so in kind would like to give us some donations, it always greatly benefits us and what we're building here. We look forward to seeing you next week. Blessed be.